Assalamualaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is Dr. Muhammad Awais Qureshi, and this is the second video on the topic of the compliance of the lungs. So the compliance of the lungs, as in word compliance, we know it's the distensibility. So you can refer to the first video of this section for the compliance of the lungs to know the basic physical meaning in respect to the lungs, the word and the meaning of the compliance. So basically, in a nutshell, let me reminded you that this is the distensibility of the lung. It is inversely proportional to the elastance, and it is inversely proportional to the stiffness of the lungs as well. So we're going to talk about the compliance, that what is the compliance of the lungs. Before knowing anything, you need to know that how the lungs are present in the chest cavity. So you have a chest cavity, and in it you have the lungs. The lungs basically are covered by the visceral pleura, and then there is a parietal pleura, which is the inner lining of the chest cavity. So if you put chest cavity at any time, it wants to expand out. It is natural tendency. And if you put the lung at any time, it is natural tendency is to collapse. A lung wants to collapse, but a chest cavity wants to further expand by their natural tendencies. Why lungs want to collapse? Because it has elastic tissue, it has elastance. Why chest wants to become expanded? Because of the pressures and the strain and stresses of the muscles, and the rib cages are in this way that it would further expand. But when they are in a system, then there are lungs, then there are chest cavity, and there are parietal and visceral pleuras, and there is a negative pressure in between them, and that pressure is between them is present in the interpleural space. That is a closed space that has no entrance to outside. It is not exposed to the outside atmosphere, so it has these lymphatic channels which will keep sucking down the extra fluid in it and maintain a negative pressure of -4 within these things. So whenever these intrapleural pressure becomes more negative, chest expands, and the lungs, they do expand. How can you do that? If you know the mechanics, you know this is a respiration. You have to breathe in by straightening your diaphragm. That you do by contracting the diaphragm, and with the contraction, the viscera of the abdomen goes down, the chest cavity comes forward, and when chest cavity, there is a space is enhanced, and the parietal pleura is pushed outward. When it is pushed outward, the intrapleural pressure drops, and that drop will suck the visceral pleura and the chest, and this entire lung system will expand. That you need to know that there are always negative pressures in the pleura, in transmural space, in the intrapleural region. So you want to know that how the chest expands, since you need to know this graph. This is the pressure volume graph, right? The pressure is on the x ordinance and the volume is on the y ordinance, and this is how it works. When you increase the pressure, the volume will increase. When you increase further, it will also increase, and further, and it will also increase. The compliance was known as the steep or the slope of the pressure volume curve. So this is the curve. It is steeper here, and then it becomes a little flatter there. So it means during the inspiration, when you're inspiring air, the lung is initially very compliant. So if I do go like that, the lung will expand maximum, and after some time it will have a little less expansion as per pressure increase. A little less expansion as compared to this, little less expansion as per pressure increase. So now this is something that you need to know as the compliance of the lungs. Another thing that you need to know is the hysteresis. What is the hysteresis? Because board questions you what the hysteresis is. Hysteresis is that the pressure of the inspiration, the curve that you get, is a slight different when you expire out. When you expiring out, the compliance of the lung through this pressure volume, they follow a different route. Why is that? Because at a given pressure, when the inspiration, the volume is a little low, but when you're expiring, the volume is a little high. Why is that? Because Lung has a coil, but it has elastance. When you put something in it with force, it expands like that. You need a lot of pressure to expand it. So as compared to pressure, the increase in volume is less, but when the air is going out, the volume is already high and it is passively going down. So the if you graph this flat, so at particular pressure there was a lesser volume while inspiration, while at the same pressure there's a greater volume while you're expiring out, because it has a little lag when it is going back to that way. There is a difference between a practical compliance of the lungs and the real time compliance of the chest wall and the lung system. So if you just take the lungs independently, like we just said, it has a compliance history. And if you just take the chest cavity without the lungs, it has a compliance history. It is very compliant. So you put air, it will expand, and you will not need to have certain pressures or increase the pressures. But when you get these two things together, it becomes a little less compliant, and that is the thing that has written here. If you see this graph right up here, you would see that this first one is the compliance of the chest wall, and the second one is the compliance of lungs. When you put together the entire system, it has a little less compliance, right? You see this, there is a little less compliance. Why is that? When they're put together, the compliance reduces. It's their natural tendency. Why? Because at this point the chest want to expand out and the lungs want to collapse, and they have the different forces, so that makes the compliance go a little down. Now, one more thing that you should know is the FRC. So what is the FRC? FRC is the functional, is a it is the functional residual capacity. It is the point of the breathing when you have expired the tidal volume. That is the place it is. Like for example, if I have this and I have expired out, that point is the point when there is no activity and the atmospheric pressure is always equal to the alveolar pressure, right? So I'm going to read the text for you so that you understand. At rest, lung volume is at FRC. So at rest, the lung volume is at FRC, and the pressure in the airway and the lung is equal to the atmospheric pressure, that is 0. Under these equilibrium conditions, the collapsing force on the lungs and expanding force on the chest wall are equal. At FRC, these forces are equal and opposite, and therefore the combined lung chest wall system neither wants to collapse or nor they want to expand. So at FRC, both the forces, the expansion, the force that is expanding the lung and the force which is collapsing because of the elasticity, is almost equal. As a result of these two opposing forces, interpleural pressure is negative, which is subatmospheric. If the air is introduced into interpleural space, the interthoracic space becomes equal to atmospheric pressure, the lung will collapse and the chest wall will spring outward. So this is one thing which is important, like we just said, that it is a normal tendency of the lungs to collapse. So what keeps it open? The only thing that keeps it open is the negative interpleural pressure in the interpleural space. Why it is there? It is there because of these gutters, the lymphatic system, which is creating that suction, and that interpleural space is not connected to outside. So if you only puncture that space, like for example in the pneumothorax, if you puncture it, then the atmospheric pressure in the intrapleural space will equally, because it is connected to outside now because of the puncture, it will become 760 mmHg, which is the atmospheric pressure. It will become positive, and the moment it will become positive, the lung by its natural tendency will collapse, and the cavity by its natural tendency will go up and become the barrel shape. There are two conditions in which this thing happens. For example, the emphysema. Emphysema is known as it's a COPD, a type of a COPD, and in which the lungs are becoming inflated. There are greater volume associated with it, and the chest is barrel shaped. The chest is barrel shaped. Why is that? Because the compliance of the lungs is increased. It is very compliant. The lung becomes more compliant than what is normal, and because of that, the FRC is also changed. And similar is the concept in the fibrosis. The lung is not very compliant, and because it is not very compliant, the FRC is also changed to the other side of it. And that's it. Hope you understand.